Hey guys, in the final part of this series, we're going to go over how to add some polish, how to add some sound effects and particle effects to make the game feel a bit better, just using FlowCanvas again, no custom scripts or anything like that. So let's start by making the effect that happens when a brick is broken by the ball. So when the ball hits the brick, we want some nice feedback to the user that the brick has been broken by the ball. So that's going to be a particle effect and also a sound effect. So I've already made a very simple particle effect here. So as you can see, it basically just splits into multiple squares with a bit of rotation, a little bit of gravity. Great, and so then very simply, we can go into one of our prefabs and we can find our flow script. So it's our basic brick. Remember, we're reusing that flow script across all of these. This is an asset. And then inside here, what we want to do is we want to instantiate our prefab for our particle effect. Now, because the prefab is also an asset, there's no problem with referencing it. But remember, you cannot reference it from the scene. So let's have a look inside here. So before we turn this off, we want to instantiate this prefab. So what I can do is I can search for instantiate, and I can just drag that from the assets, remember, because we're in an asset graph, directly into here, make that a variable, and drag that into there. Now, if I were to do the same thing in the scene, you see here, it gives you a little warning. Because this is an asset, you cannot reference things in the scene. So just a little thing to remember. But in this case, completely fine, because this is a prefab in the assets. Now we want to make sure the position is set to our own position. So I'll just grab self, get transform, position, and plug that directly into there. We don't really care about the rotation. Rotation is fine to be at default. And parent, we don't want it to have any parent. So all we need to do now is connect this up. So we'll grab that flow, connect it into there, connect this one back into the set active false. Let's move this down, let's clean up the graph a little bit. There we go. And so this is important because if you set the flow graph, this flow graph to be off, so set active false, then it would not actually instantiate if this were connected on this side. So we want to make sure we instantiate before we turn our self off. Now, one thing you may have noticed from the particle effect was that it is actually red all the time, regardless, but we have different colors bricks. So we really want to be able to change that color depending on the brick that is calling that spawn or that instantiate particle. If it's a blue brick, we want the particle to be blue. If it's green, we want it to be green, and so on. All right, so here, when we get hit by the ball, we instantiate our brick effect, then we turn ourselves off. What we can do here is after we instantiate this brick effect, we get that value straight through here. So we could just send a signal to that to change it to a color that we want. So what I will do here is I will create a new signal. So I'm just going to copy paste this one, signal ball hit, and call it signal set particle color. And here we don't need this direct variable. Instead, we will rename it to be color and choose color. There we go. Then very simply, we still have our flow graph open. So we will just drag that signal in here and we'll add an invoke signal because we want to invoke it from here. And what we'll do is we'll set the target to be the game object. So that's our particle break effect or brick break effect that we've created. And we can connect that flow up there. So it happens after we instantiate, of course, and then reconnect that to our final setting of this brick to be inactive. Now, of course, we do need to have a color that we could configure per brick that we pass in here. So let's create a graph blackboard variable, color, and we'll call this brick color. And I'll just give it a default value of white with full transparency. Doesn't matter too much. Then we want to grab that, get the brick color, and pass that directly into our color input swatch here. There we go. So that's all hooked up nicely. And because we now have this variable in the graph, what we can do is we can look at each brick, and you see here, oh, first of all, remember, we need to expose it. So we'll expose it public, and now we can see it here. And so now for every brick prefab, we can override that variable by clicking these little arrows, override variable. So our blue one can be blue, our green one green. Let's quickly set that up here. So what I'll do is double click into them just so I can very quickly sample their color. So we have blue, save, go into green, click the little arrows, green, red, and finally yellow. All right, so now we are actually passing that color to our game object, but our particle effect game object doesn't have anything to receive the signal. So let's set that up. So I'm going to go into our break effect, so double click, here we go, and we could just add a new flow graph, no problem. A new flowscript controller, create new, let's make it bound. Then all we need to do, because now we're on the other side of the signal, is drag in our signal set particle color, and we want to use the signal callback, and then we go, perfect. We have the color coming through. So whichever brick that we hit, they will pass that color through the signal, and now we can do what we need to do with that color, which is change the start color parameter here. Now this is pretty straightforward, and because we're in the prefab, we can just reference our particle system directly. So we'll just drag that in there, and we want to get the particle system properties main, that's our main module, and we want to set our start color like that. And because this has the green self, it means it's going to try to find our particle system. We could, of course, be more explicit, drag it in, and connect it like that. If you have a more complicated prefab with different children, that's going to be more reliable. Now we just need to simply connect that flow up there to set start color and pass in our color here. And that's going to cast it to a gradient, but that's okay. Our particle system, because it can accept a gradient or a color, that's just a cast is needed there. Now, while we're in this flow graph, I think we should also set up a nice cleanup. So after this has been played, we kind of want to destroy it. We don't want it to stick around. Otherwise, we'll end up having a lot of junk objects in the scene, and it's not really useful for us. So FlowCanvas makes this pretty straightforward. What I'm going to do is add a wait while, and I'm going to wait while the particle effect is playing. So what I can do is I can just search for is playing. There we go. And that gives me a Boolean, which plugs straight into that condition here. So while this is playing, it's going to wait. It's not going to progress the flow. Now, of course, we need an event to start this on. So we'll go into events, graph on start. So on start, it's going to start our wait until condition blocker. And when it's finished, we're just going to destroy our self like that. Now, because our particle effect is set to play on wake, we don't need to call play on it explicitly. It's here play on awake. And because awake happens before start, we should have no risk of destroying before it has started. First awake, then start. All right, so let's have a look at what's going on here. So as you can see, the correct color of the particles is being assigned to them. So it hit the green and the red. It hit two greens, it hit the red, and you can see it's correctly changing the color of that particle system to match the color of the brick. And let's go through and just check through the entire flow. So first it hits this. Now it's going to hit that yellow brick. So let's grab that yellow brick, look at the flow script. All right, so it has gone into here. It has instantiated this brick effect here, as you can see. It's waiting now because it's still playing. It's already set the particle color. As you can see here, it's been set to yellow. Then it has destroyed itself because it has no longer been playing, so it's cleaned itself up nicely, and the brick has been turned off as well. So that's all working really nicely, but let's add a sound effect so it sounds a lot better and has much more impact. So for the sound, I've just downloaded from a free sound website. So for the sound, what I'm going to do is make things fairly simple because this is a small scope game. We don't want to over-engineer anything. So I'm going to open up our brick break effect, and I'm just going to add the sound as part of that prefab. So create an audio source there. We can drag that clip directly into here. There we go. We're going to use 2D, so all these settings, the default settings are fine. We don't need to loop or anything like that. Everything is good. But what we do want to make sure, so this is going to play on awake, just like the particle effect, but we want to make sure we also wait for this to finish. So let's drag in that audio source, make that a variable. And now this also has an isPlaying property. So we can get isPlaying, and we want to make sure that if the particle effect is playing or the audio source is playing, then we wait. And so to do that, we're just going to add an OR. It's going to be this function OR, and that takes two booleans. We plug them both in there, connect in that value there. So now, if the particle effect is longer than the audio source or the audio clip is longer than the particle effect, it doesn't matter. It's going to wait for both of them to be finished before it destroys itself. So for the particle effect, we're setting the start color to the color to match the bricks. However, we don't really have any kind of relationship between the color of a brick and the sound that it makes. But I do want to give some kind of variety. So instead of setting some kind of value based on the brick prefab, we're just going to randomize the pitch of that sound. So what I want to do, I can reuse this on start, it's no problem. But if I want it to be a little bit cleaner, I can just duplicate that and dedicate this to just setting the pitch. So then we can create a box here that says clean up when done. And we can create a box here that just says set appropriate starting color, particle starting color, just so we don't get confused. And then here, set random pitch. Really important when your graph starts to do multiple things to really clean it up and categorize everything into these boxes. All right, so now let's grab this and we want to set our pitch like this. We're only doing it on start and it's going to be a random value. So we can look for random range right here, plug that into there like that. And then we can set this to a reasonable value, maybe 0.8 to 1.2. And that's all we need to do. So let's play and see how that sounds. There you go. Now it's pretty subtle, but you can notice there are some pitch changes, which makes it feel a lot more natural, especially when two bricks are hit very close to each other. Next, we want to have some nice sounds when we bounce off different objects. So what I want is a sound when we bounce off the wall and a different sound when we bounce off the paddle. And that's going to give us a little bit more of a nice feeling of, you know, we hit the ball rather than it just rebounding off of something. So for each of the walls, we've already got our game object set up, and we're already doing something similar in the top wall where we're intercepting the ball hit signal. So we're receiving that and doing something. And so these other walls are also going to be able to receive this ball hit as long as we also give them a rigid body 2D. So let's add a rigid body 2D to all of these, and then we'll set up a flowscript controller. So I have them all selected, and I'm going to add a rigid body 2D and make it kinematic, just like that. And then also I'm going to grab all of them and add a flowscript controller. And these are all actually just going to have the same behavior. So I'm going to make one. So here I'm going to create an asset, and it's going to be called FS wall hit. And then just make sure I assign that wall hit to all of these, except for the top wall. The top wall, we're going to handle it differently because the top wall, when it gets hit, destroys the ball and loses a life, which is very different. These ones, we just want a nice subtle ping sound. Now what we do want is an audio source. So I'm going to create an audio source here. We're just going to reuse the same audio source. So let's call this audio source. And we'll add an audio source here. And we're going to turn off play on awake because we're going to call play explicitly on this. All right, so let's grab one of these and we're going to edit the flow script. And remember, this is an asset. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the graph and we're going to add an audio source as a variable. We're going to have to link that up for each wall. We're going to link it to this audio source. So make sure we expose that public like that. And then as you can see here, I can click these arrows and drag that in. So we're going to be using that audio source for all of them. So then what we can do is look at our top wall and you see we can just copy this signal callback into our wall hit flow graph. There we go. So when the object that has this flow script controller on it, this flow script assigned, gets hit, then we're going to do something. Now we already have this variable here, so we can just get our audio source, drag out, and we can do play one shot, and our clip will drag in the clip we want to use, like that, and just connect that up. Now we also want to do that pitch variation, so let's go into our effect, FX break effect, open that prefab, and we can just copy this logic here, copy these nodes, go back into our wall hit flow script, paste those nodes, and then we just want to call that before we play the one shot, like that. So delete that null one, connect that audio source into there, and then we can just use that value there. We don't need to worry about the direct hit or anything like that. Now we probably want this to be a bit more subtle, so we're just going to change that volume to be 50%. All right, and let's play and see how that sounds. There we go. So we're getting the sounds as it bounces off the walls, but as it bounces off the paddle or on the top wall, we don't get anything. So let's implement those. So for the paddle, we're just going to do something really similar. So we already have a flow script on our paddle, so we're just going to jump into there, and we need to add our event. So let's grab our event from one of these. So copy that, go to our paddle, paste that in there, and we're going to change that sound effect to be a different one. So just drag the clip into there, like that, and then make sure that we have an audio source. So I'm just going to add an audio source directly to our paddle, just like that. Drag it in there and connect that. Pretty straightforward. And we've got our random pitch already set up, and that's all we need to do for that. And I'll just make a little box around that as well, just so we remember what that's doing. So control, drag, play sound when ball hits paddle. There we go. So those sounds are pretty good. And now what we want to do is have a nice little death effect and a sound effect when we hit the top wall. It's kind of a significant event in the game when you lose a life. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab the brick break effect, make a copy of that, and call that ball break effect. So basically we're going to have the same logic. We're going to play a sound and an effect, but we're going to change the effect to be more appropriate for our ball. So inside our FX ball break effect, I've basically just changed our start color to be blue, added more particles, and changed the size to be a bit smaller. And since we copied that prefab, we've also copied the FlowScript controller. So we can go into there, and we can basically get rid of this particle starting color. This doesn't matter. We don't need to use this. But we can keep the random pitch, and we can keep the cleanup when it's done. Again, for a larger scope project, maybe we would want to make all of this more modular and reusable, but I think for a simple project, it's much better to just keep it simple by copy pasting certain things. There's not a lot of nodes, and it would end up being more complicated trying to reuse a lot of stuff rather than just copy pasting. And on our sound effect, our audio source, we're going to change the sound effect to something else, something more significant for losing a life. And now all we need to do is hook that up to our top wall, because when we hit the top wall, that's when we lose a life, and we already have all that logic set up here. So let's just insert some additional logic. So we want to do similar to what we did for the hitting the bricks, where we want to instantiate an object. So we'll connect that flow in like that. We want the parent to be null. And then for the position, we actually want the position of the ball. So not of ourself. If it's of ourself, we're going to be basically spawning the effect in the middle of the wall every time. We don't want to do that. So what we can do is use the sender, because that's our ball. Our ball sends if it hits me or not. Then we can get our position from that. So we'll get our position and just plug that directly into there. And then the only thing we need to do is set up the prefab. So we have it here, the ball break effect. Let's drag that in there like that. All right, and so now when we play, see there, we get a nice sound effect and a nice effect when we lose our life. So as you can see with FlowCanvas, it's pretty intuitive just to go in and out of different flow scripts and add different effects or sound effects. So let's add a few more. So we want to add sound effects to the powers. So for example, the bomb, we need to add a sound effect and a nice particle for that. That's really important. And also some nice little jingle for when we win or when we lose. So just like before, I've duplicated one of our existing effects prefabs and made an FX bomb. So here I've just modified some of the parameters of the particle effect, and I've basically kept the flowscript controller the same, random pitch and cleanup when done. So nothing too crazy, nothing new there. And then basically where we handle the ability, so in the ball, we're going to set up to instantiate that bomb. So I'm going to open up the ball, double click that prefab, open up the flow script. Here we go. Now we already have our signal here, ball power bomb, and all we need to do is instantiate that bomb effect. So we'll just do what we did before, instantiate, drag in that FX bomb into the source, the original, and our position is actually going to be from the receiver. The receiver is this flow script. So we could use self and extract the transform and everything, or we could just say receiver, position, and plug that directly in like that. And then we'll just drag this out and just make that null. Then we need to, of course, bring the flow through there and out there like that. And that should now basically make our bomb do some nice effects and a sound effect. So let's just quickly look at that bomb again. So it's the same as always. I have a particle effect and I have an audio source and a couple of other particle effects which are children of this, which means that when this plays, these will also play. And again, we just have the random pitch and the cleanup when done. Nothing new. So now let's add some victory and some defeat music. So for this, if we look in our game state, we can see that we are checking for the win condition and we're checking for the lose condition here. And then after we've done that, we're actually invoking this signal here. Signal game over or signal level cleared. Now, because of that, what we could actually do is we could just create here a sting, let's call it maybe sting controller, create a flow script controller here, new bound graph, we'll create an audio source inside here, audio source. And because we already have those signals, we can just drag this in here and say signal callback when it's game over and signal callback when the level is cleared. And then what we want to do here is basically play something on the audio source. So we'll grab the audio source component, drag it into the graph like that, copy paste it, and we're going to just do play one shot and copy paste that one as well down here, play one shot, and then just drag that into there like that. Then we just need to assign our clips to whatever we want. So this is game over, so this should be our defeat audio. So I think I have a defeat somewhere here, game over maybe. We have a game over and then play one shot of success or victory. Okay, that one's probably a bit softer, so let's use that one. There we go. Let's just check the game over. Yeah, that sounds fine. All right, and because these are all just waiting for that signal, it's pretty clean, pretty simple. We could, of course, have put it inside the game state as well if we wanted to, but I think it's nice that we just have it kind of independent over here. All right, so let's play and see if everything's working. There's the bomb effect. Ball breaking, ball hitting the brick. And there's our game over sound. And our level cleared sound. So that's basically the end of this series of how to make a simple game using just FlowCanvas. So throughout the tutorial, you've seen that we didn't need to use any custom scripting. Everything was able to be managed within FlowCanvas, whether it was the management of the game state, the actual management of individual entities like the ball or the paddle or whatever, as well as the focus of this tutorial, which was adding more polish. So adding some sound effects, adding some visual effects. So hopefully this tutorial has shown you the potential of what you can really do with FlowCanvas.